Good day to you. I'm John Marino, and we are Westchester Talk Radio, produced by Shac Creative and brought to you by a variety of our friends around the region here in Westchester and throughout the tri-state region. For example, Entergy is one of our sponsors, the Indian Point Energy Center in Buchanan. They literally are keeping our lights on throughout Westchester and our tri-state area, and they promise to do so and to continue supporting our communities and helping us do what we do right through April of 2021. And by Lipolis Electric, where you are never left in the dark at Lipolis. Check out their podcast series, Live Wire, produced by us at Shac Creative, and it's found on demand, lipoliselectric.com. It runs on westchestertalkradio.com and can also be found on demand on our website, Westchester Talk Radio podcast page too. We are joined by Fred Singleton. Fred Singleton, longtime track and field coach over at White Plains High School, the guy who is the man and the brain trust behind, along with Executive Committee Director Emeritus Dan Woodard of the Glen D. Loucks Track and Field Games over the committee over at White Plains High School, held every year in the month of May. Ironically, we'll get to the cancellation of the Loucks games in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you, Fred, about a book that you wrote a few years ago, I guess about 5 years ago in 2014, 2015. It's called The Quorum's Child and the Constitution Challenging Election of 2020. Let me repeat that. The Quorum's Child and the Constitution Challenging Election of 2020. So you wrote a book about pretty much what's going on right now, Fred Singleton, half a decade ago. My first question to you has to be, do you have the winning lottery numbers too?
Well, John, I wish I did have those.
Yeah, we could split, maybe. How did you come up with a book title like this and the thought process and genesis for a book like this? You are a clairvoyant 5 years down the road, and 5 years down the road is today. Now.
Well, it all started back in 2003. I was preparing a lesson for my history class. I used to teach American history in the
White Plains High School, yes.
Actually, at the Rochambeau School.
Rochambeau, okay.
Yes, and so it was in the fall, and I was preparing a lesson for the Constitution. And I wanted to go over some of the amendments, and I started reading, a little bit more detailed, some of the amendments, and I came across the 20th Amendment. And I found something in it that I thought, well, this looks a little strange, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Then the next year,
what was so strange, first of all?
Okay, so I'm going to quote the 20th Amendment, and it says, if at the time fixed for the beginning of the term of the president-elect shall have died, the vice president-elect shall become president. So I read that and I said, oh, okay. And I was trying to figure out the legalese and everything, but there was something that struck me as a little odd about it. But I couldn't figure out what it was. So, I just went ahead and listed the amendments I wanted to cover.
Now, before you continue, I do want to point out, too, Joe Biden keeps talking about selecting a vice presidential running mate who's ready to go on day one if need be. So you covered that, I guess, too, here with your thought process when you put the book together. Yeah.
Yes, and the next year, which would have been 2003, I brought out the lesson again, and I said, what was it about this 20th Amendment? So I stayed on it this time. And then I reread it like 50 times. And I finally figured out what had struck me as being a little odd. And it says, the president-elect shall have died, the vice president-elect shall become president. So knowing the Constitution a little bit, I knew that a person actually in the November election gets the popular vote, but the electors in our system don't actually vote until December. And that's when the person becomes the president-elect, when he or she officially becomes the president-elect.
Now, let's say we have a situation like England, where Boris Johnson was recently incapacitated and we had a president-elect basically in the state Boris Johnson was a few weeks ago. What happens then? Is that at that moment the equivalent of the president-elect having died or passed away? He's not functionable at that point.
That is covered in a different amendment. But in this case, we're now getting to the election of the president. So in November, the people vote. The electors find out who they are pledged then to vote for in December. And even that's a little complicated. But then in December, the electors vote. I believe it's the second Wednesday after the first Monday, some little strange twist in the Constitution. All right. So my thought was that's the day that the person actually becomes the president-elect. Not in November, but in December. And then I thought, well, what happens, you just mentioned Boris Johnson, if something happens to that person in that time period between when the people vote in November and when the electors vote in December? What if the person actually passed away during that time period? And then here's what I saw as strange. So if that were to be the case, there would be no president-elect. Let's say that person passed away in that 1 month period. There would be no president-elect. And so if you look at the structure of the sentence, I'll skip a little bit, if the president-elect shall have died, the vice president-elect shall become president. So the structure of the sentence states the second part has to happen if the first part happens. The second part is the vice president-elect shall become president because the president-elect has died. But what if there's no president-elect? If the person has died between November and December,
what do we do?
He or she can't become the president-elect because they're dead. We actually did have a case like this in the election of 1872. In the case of Horace Greeley, who the school in...
is named after in Chappaqua.
In Chappaqua. He ran against Ulysses S. Grant. He passed away during that time period. It obviously mattered to the family and to his friends, but in American history, it didn't because Grant had won the election. But when they went to count the electors, it was deemed 4 electors from Georgia decided to still vote for him, even though he had passed away. And the House of Representatives said, no, he is not eligible to receive electors because he's dead. So he doesn't qualify to receive these electors. So you might say, okay, so what's the big deal about that? Okay, there's nothing in the Constitution to cover this scenario. So if indeed that's going to pass away, who do these electors vote for? And complicating the matter even more, and this is my fictional book, I had to write it in the future. So that's, I started it in about 2005, and it was published in 2016. And it takes place in 2020. The thing is, what do you do? And
do you offer a solution in the book as to what should be done?
Well, my solution is that they have to come up with a constitutional amendment prior to this actually happening. And so when I started doing my research, I went on for a level college experts, and this group put me in touch with a Yale professor, and I contacted him, and he said, Fred, you are on this. I had gone to Congress. I had petitioned Congress back in the 90s about this same situation. And
it seems like, obviously, to Congress, it's not that important of a situation, I guess, because you're talking over 20 years now and they have not acted. many
No,
different Congresses.
we've had
Nobody acts.
Yeah, because I guess it's such a remote
Possibility, like a pandemic was such a remote possibility, and now here we are with this too.
Right. So basically, and I'm going to quote it again, the vice president elect shall become president, but that only happens if the president elect dies. If there's no president elect, then the vice president elect, according to the wording in the Constitution, can't take over because there was never a president elect who died.
And the Speaker of the House take over at that point, number 3 in line.
Well,
well,
I don't know how this would play out because, first of all, you're going to have legal.
All kinds of legalese because number 3 is not number 3 anymore in this scenario. And the question is, if the president-elect dies and there's no vote by the electors up to that point, where does number 3 actually fall? Number 1, number 2, do you stay number 3?
Or does number 2 actually become number 1?
Number 1, right.
So it could potentially be a mess. And to play it forward to 2020, the scenario would be Joe Biden and whoever he picks as the vice president. If Mr. Biden were to win the popular vote in November, and unfortunately have something happen to him between November and December.
And again, he keeps talking about, I need somebody ready on day 1.
Yeah. So it's a potential big problem for this country because this thing wouldn't be settled for months or years. And
all right, so here's something that comes to mind. If Donald Trump gets reelected and Mike Pence is his vice presidential running mate again, before the electors vote in December to confirm that re-election of Donald Trump at that point, something happens to the president re-elect at that point, and we're not at the point where the electors have yet voted in December. Does Mike Pence become president because he's already a sitting vice president, or are we back at the stage you talk about if Joe Biden were to be the president and something unfortunate happened to him?
Very good question, John. So if something happened to Mr. Trump between November and December, and he had won the election to be reelected, Vice President Pence would automatically become the new president right away in that interim time period between November and December, because the Constitution has taken awareness of that possibility, which has happened several times.
And that just kicks in that proviso. But then when we get to the electors, what happens at that point?
There's a good question, John.
And if Mike Pence is thinking, I want to go back to Indiana, I don't want to do this.
That's a great question because it's not covered.
So they should elect you or me, basically, at that point then.
Okay, so now we get
we'll have a President Singleton after all this.
Oh, God. We get into the...
Sign me up.
Of what's called faithless electors. In several states, there are laws that say that the electors have to vote for the person who they are pledged to vote for. And, the electors get into the position of if the person wins the popular state in a particular state, his or her electors are the ones who get the vote. And in many states, they, by law, have to vote for that person. So in my where it is, part of it is dedicated to a battle in the courts as to do people then have to vote for a dead person. This person has died. In my book, his name is James Augustus Faulkner. He is the incumbent president, and he passes away. He had a series of medical issues. He had been warned by people not to run for re-election because of these medical issues. He ignored them. He ran anyway. He won, and he passes away. And to complicate matters even more, he had picked a new vice president to run with him. So, because he and the previous vice president weren't getting along. So, this would be a scenario of Trump and Pence, and Trump decides to pick somebody else to be the vice president. And so those electors go to that vice president. So that complicates it even more because the sitting vice president would only be president until January. So I don't know what they would do in that situation. They can't transfer those electors. They're bound by law, and I believe it's 26 states, that they have to vote for the person who won the popular vote in that state. So in the book, in The Quorum's Child, there's a big legal battle. Do I have to, in fact, it's the mayor of Bellingham, Washington. He's an elector, and he is being forced by the laws of Washington state to have to vote for a dead man. And he refuses to do it. He takes legal action. It just goes from there.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a pandemic written into this book by chance?
You know what? It plays a minor part, but that was one of the issues that President Faulkner had to deal with. There's a pandemic going on, not of the nature that we're dealing with in 2020, actually. But yeah, that was part of it. He's dealing with a law that was a secret law written in 1865 that was uncovered by Woodrow Wilson in a time capsule. And it's been kept secret all these years because of the ramifications it would have towards the descendants of African slaves. And if they were to bring it to the forefront, there would be repercussions of billions of dollars. So presidents have kept it secret for a while.
The book is The Quorum's Child and the Constitution Challenging Election of 2020, written by Fred Singleton, longtime track and field coach at White Plains High School and a longtime history teacher at the Rochambeau School in White Plains as well. And we'll talk with Fred about a couple of other topics in just a moment here. I do want to say thank you to certain people who make what we do at Westchester Talk Radio possible, like Hightower Westchester at Hightower. They leave no stone unturned. They always go the extra mile to find the right financial solution just for you. Look for their podcast series on demand at teams.hightoweradvisors.com/team/Westchester/media room. Hightower Westchester, your wealth management is managed to a fiduciary standard. Plus, Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon, and our good friends over at White Plains Hospital. Special thanks and shout out to all the first responders and people up front on the front lines at White Plains Hospital and throughout the tri-state area at White Plains Hospital. We produce for them at Shac Media and Shac Creative their podcast series, Health Talk. Find it on the White Plains Hospital website, also on WestchesterTalkRadio.com, plus on demand on the Westchester Talk Radio podcast page. Fred Singleton, a victim of COVID-19, has been the huge annual event for over half a century held in just a few days at White Plains High School, the Glenn D. Laux annual track and field event. And this was canceled over a month ago now, I guess, by the committee at White Plains High School, of which you are the meet director for the games held every year in early May. How do you feel a few weeks later now about this decision?
Well, obviously it was the correct decision. We wouldn't have been able to do it because the state has canceled the school year. So legally, we could have held the meet. I think back then, March 20th, somewhere in that area, when we decided to call it, we could see the right on the wall that this action 200 athletes plus coaches and parents and other of the Louts games, and also to and he talked to Joe Ricca, the superintendent of the schools, and together we all chose to say, that's it for this year. The Penn Relays had just canceled. The Nationals indoors had just canceled. And so we just said, you know what, this is the writing on the wall. Let's just forget it for
And
this
I
year.
assume all the sponsors understand the situation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's obviously if this was just us saying, oh, let's not just have the meet, well, that could present a problem. But in the light of what's happening to the society, this was just another, as Pink Floyd said, another brick on the wall.
3,200, more than 3,200 student athletes from around the tri-state area, up and down the East Coast, the Eastern Seaboard, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, into Canada, down to the Bahamas and the islands, Washington, D.C. Kids come from all over. They plan on this. It's a key part of their high school track careers for most of them, if not all of them. And yet, safety first. So let's hope the situation will have changed by next May and that the Louts games can be held at White Plains High School. Fred, by the way, reaction from athletic directors that you had to tell we can't do this year. I assume they were totally understanding.
Well, I don't really deal with the athletic directors, but the coaches, everybody understood.
Yeah, coaches, everybody athletically at the other schools. Yeah.
A lot of nice emails saying, Fred, we understand. Oh, we'll miss the games. They're always the highlight of our season, etc. But everybody understood. And I don't think anybody would want to put their kids on a bus, go somewhere, even stay in a hotel under the circumstances we're living in presently. It's just impossible. Even if we had the green light from the state and from our school district, I don't know who would attend. It certainly would. It probably would have just been 5 or 6 local teams. It would not have been the Louts games by any stretch of the imagination. So, we just move on.
Let's hope the Louts games are back next year in 2021, and this year would have been number 53, correct?
Right. Let's hope the Louts games and a heck of a lot of other things are back.
Back in 1 year's time, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Nick Modugno was a long time a track coach over at Valhalla High School, right up the road from White Plains. Nick passed away, a victim of COVID-19. He died at the age of 91, legendary track coach. He was the godfather, the dean of track at Valhalla for almost 40 years. Your recollections of Nick Modugno?
First of all, I just found out about it about 2 days ago. The best smile in Section 1 in terms of when you'd see him, he was just, Freddie! He was just a delightful man. His teams were always prepared. I mean, Valhalla's not a big school, but they had some big hearts, and those kids would run for him, throw for him. You knew if you were in a meet with Valhalla, his athletes would find their way to the top. He always put on a great show, and what a great man.
Nick Modugno, 14 league titles and 11 Section 1 championships, guiding the boys track team over at Valhalla High School almost 40 years. Again, the dean of track at Valhalla, passing away at the age of 91, the victim of COVID-19. He also coached gymnastics and tennis at Valhalla, too. One of your former student athletes at White Plains High School has made a mark for herself over at White Plains Hospital. Talk about her.
Julianne Clampett, a great young lady, was a good runner for us, graduated around, I'd say, 2011, 2012, somewhere in that area. Went on to she went to University of Pennsylvania, always stayed in touch, great personality, became a nurse, and ended up being a nurse at White Plains Hospital. And during I sort of kept in touch with her, but during this adventure, I started thinking about her, And I reached out to her, and she said yes. She was telling me about the experiences at the hospital, and we arranged for the Louts games to provide some pizzas for them. And that was when this was first really starting to happen. And
And a
then,
good amount of money was spent on those pizzas. I think you bought the pizzeria, right?
well, we bought, it was about 6 or 7 pies for
Uh-huh.
for for the workers in the emergency room.
Somebody showed me a copy of the bill. It might have been more than 6 and 7. I think you're being a little modest.
Maybe not.
Maybe. Yeah.
That was it. But
Yeah.
then,
Okay.
I'm sitting here in my basement where I am right now with you, and I'm looking at all these boxes of shirts that we had. And
And you're talking about the 2020 Glenn D. Laux shirts for the games that would have been in just a
correct.
few days. Mhm.
Correct. I had ordered all of these back in January for an April delivery, which we got. And, I would have been stuck with all of these. And I just said, that's a nice idea to just give them to Burke Rehabilitation and to the workers at White Plains Hospital so that they could, get a little bit of joy. Julianne sent me the pictures yesterday. She delivered them yesterday. I met her on Thursday of last week at the high school.
I saw those pictures too.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I met her on Thursday. We social distanced, and I put them in her trunk. And we talked for a few minutes. It was her day off. And I said, are you sure you want to come down to White Plains on your day off? And she said, yeah, definitely. So I met her then. We talked for, about 15, 20 minutes, and we went our separate ways. And then she delivered them yesterday. And she said the workers loved getting them. And she sent me 4 pictures of work with the shirt.
So you have so many frontline workers there at White Plains Hospital decked out in these Glenn D. Laux 2020. Well, they look to be rust colored, the shirts. Beautiful shirts.
Yeah, they're actually Texas orange, University of Texas orange color.
Yeah, okay.
So,
like a burnt orange.
each year we try to change. Yes, we try to change the color every year. And so we gave those to them and to Burke. Then we had some other shirts that each year would go to the winners of each varsity event. So not only would an athlete win a trophy, he or she would also take home a purple shirt. And on the back of the shirt, it mentions that there have been 2,537 trophies given out in Louts, and I happen to have at least one of them. And so, that number changes each year. But again, I had those in the basement here. So I was wondering what to do with those. And my wife, Margot, and I were watching the news one night, and they had a story about this group in Pennsylvania.
Outside Philadelphia, right? I think you might have seen it on Channel 6 in Philly. I heard about that too.
Yes. Brascom, America. And they're the ones who make the materials for the PPEs for the workers in the hospitals. And they came up with an agreement that they would sit in their office, well, not sit, but work in their office for 28 straight days, making as much of this as they could. They'd go in shifts of 12 hours. They slept and ate there. And about 44 of them dedicated 28 days to just making this stuff to fight the disease. And so my wife and I saw those. We were sitting in the living room, Margot and I, and then I came downstairs to get something, to print something actually. And I looked at the boxes and it's labeled winners, the winners shirts. And I said, if anybody is a winner, these guys are winners. So these guys and women are winners. So I said to Margot, you know what? I think I'm going to mail these to these people there. So I ran it by the Louts committee via email, and everybody thought it was a good idea. So I boxed them up, wrote a nice letter telling them, I know you guys don't know who we are, but we saw your story there. And they had mentioned the gentleman who was the supervisor. And so I put his name on the box. And they should have been delivered yesterday, which would have been Monday.
And they'll know now who the Loucks committee and what the Loucks games are, correct? They'll know now.
Yeah.
You said they didn't know them before. They'll know now.
I explained who we were, that we were Meet in New York, and I explained what these shirts were, that they were for winners. And I just said to myself in the letter, I said to Joe, I said that no one exemplifies winning more than the spirit that you guys did in putting those 28 days together and trying to help fight this disease. So we sent off 50 shirts to them.
Fred, for anyone who would like to make a contribution, and this is all based off contributions, how the games are put together financially every year, and so many great sponsors around the tri-state area pitch in with that. For anyone who would like to find out more about the Loucks games, maybe make a contribution, what should they do?
They can go to our website, which is www.theloutsgames.org. And right there in the middle, you'll see a PayPal that you can hit, and you can either pay by credit card or PayPal, either way. And or they can mail a check made out to the Glendy Louts Games, and they can mail it to me at White Plains High School, 550 North Street, White Plains, New York, 10605. And I'll make sure that our treasurer, Dana Comfort, gets it. I'll send it to him at his house. And that's the way it gets done.
I know Dana. He's a comforting guy. He's got the right last name, no doubt about that. Right?
Yes, he is. Yeah. And we put out a lot of money this year that we're not going to have to use for next year. We paid for all the trophies and the medals, all these shirts that we're now donating. So, yeah, anybody who wants to help us, that's great. But, I understand that the main focus for any giving should be to the workers who are in the hospitals.
Fred Singleton is the author. He's, first of all, a longtime track and field coach, White Plains High School, and author of the book he put together over the course of a decade, finally finalized it in 2016, to be exact. The Quorum's Child and the Constitution Challenging, Election of 2020. How do you get a copy of the book, Fred?
You can go on to Amazon and you can just type in J. Fred Singleton.
J is for your given first name of Joseph, right?
Correct.
For anyone looking at this and viewing this, you'll see on the screen it says Joseph Singleton, but everybody knows you by your middle name of Fred.
Correct.
Okay.
So they can just once they're on Amazon, they can go to search, or they can put in Quorum's Child. It took me a long time to realize how to spell quorum correctly, so they might just want to go with J. Fred Singleton.
Anything close to quorum, you'll get to it, right?
Yes.
There
yes.
you go. All right. As we find on Google and other search engines as well too. So Fred Singleton, I do want to say, the guy who puts the Loucks games together every year at White Plains High School. You've been the meet director for close to 2 decades now, I guess. And everything you do in the community with Loucks, everything you are doing during this response to the COVID-19 pandemic for those at White Plains Hospital, at Burke Rehabilitation Center in White Plains, for the group in Pennsylvania outside Philadelphia, and so much more that you do that people don't know about. The New York Post runs a series. They run an article every day, part of a series called Hero of the Day, and they focus generally on somebody in New York City, once in a while somebody outside the 5 boroughs. But I have to say, Fred Singleton, in Westchester County, you are our hero, well-deserved, and we thank you for all you do.
Well, I appreciate that. I would not even consider myself that. I'm just a guy who had some stuff to give out. You go talk to those people who work at White Plains Hospital or Burke Rehabilitation. Those are our heroes, along with the people who are delivering food, the people at the supermarkets, the UPS guy, all of these are the people who are keeping America running, the people in those meat packing facilities. Those are the people who are keeping this country running, along with the governors who are, most of all, are doing a great job. So,
I second your emotion, Fred, and let's put you on that list too, locally here in Westchester, and no doubt beyond,
that.
because what you do has reached down to, I don't want to say really another part of the country. I consider the Philly area part of this region here too, but outside of the Westchester area in a good long way, no doubt, Fred. And I'm sure without a doubt the things you've done in your lifetime has reached way beyond. As the meet director at the Louts games, you do touch those outside of the tri-state area, all across the country, into Canada, down to the Caribbean islands as well, into our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Fred Singleton, we thank you. You and yours stay safe, all the best, and thank you for being a part of Westchester Talk Radio. Once again, Fred, hope we get to talk again soon.
Thanks, John, and folks out there, please stay safe and practice that social distancing. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Fred. Joseph Fred Singleton here on Westchester Talk Radio, produced by Shac Creative, and sponsored by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center in Buchanan, where they promise to keep Westchester powered right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric in Pelham, Westchester, and Pauling in Dutchess County, and in Manhattan, too. With Lipolis, you are never in the dark. Also, we salute our heroes at White Plains Hospital, all the frontline workers putting their lives on the line to keep you safe during this COVID-19 pandemic. Hightower, Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard, and Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon. I'm John Marino. We are Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com, produced by Shac, the creative. That is Shac, S-H-A-R-C, not a K, S-H-A-R-C, creative. We are Westchester Talk Radio.